Urban sprawl, or suburbanization, is the expansion of cities and towns based around housing that is less dense in comparison to larger cities, like New York City, for example. Suburbanization is also characterized by the use of Euclidean, or single-use zoning. This is a system of zoning that does not combine different types of areas like residential and commercial. Instead, they're kept separate, residential housing in one area, and then commercial buildings in another area. When doing my research on the history of suburbia, I was surprised to find that it's largely associated with World War II and the change in the lifestyle of Americans that came after the victory. Shortly after the war ended came a period of time called the baby boom, in which the amount of babies being born skyrocketed. Along with this, other factors at the time, such as higher divorce rates and longer lifespans, increased the demand for housing. And the, in many ways, consumer society that came after the war made people really start buying a lot of automobiles, and those became very common in American life. And that just made it more reasonable for people to start buying personal houses that didn't have to be right beside their workplaces. William Levitt ended up creating what would be known as like the blueprint for suburban houses, and it'd be called a Levittown. But Levitt did also want to keep these neighborhoods for only white people and tried to stop the racial integration into these neighborhoods. So suburbanization in America is for the most part very rapid because America is a very rapidly growing nation. Between 2015 and 2065, Pew Research Center predicts that 80% of the population increase will be due to immigration. And looking specifically in North Carolina, after the 2010 census, the population was a little over 9.5 million, but the 2020 census showed the population to be almost 10.5 million. So that's an increase of almost 1 million people in just North Carolina. The popularization of suburban neighborhoods and this lifestyle would lead to the prioritization of efficiency and mass production in building companies. So copying and pasting identical land plot designs and house designs throughout a whole neighborhood was a way to save money, basically, that's the goal. And by standardizing the designs, they could basically just order the same stuff in bulk from the same places and then just mass produce into neighborhoods. And that would become what we know now as cookie cutter neighborhoods.
So I live in eastern Chatham County, which is very close to the Chatham County line where it borders with Wake County. And in the last 2 years, there's been very significant development on the Wake County side. The views from my yard have now changed, whereas it used to just be all wooded and there used to be a lot of wildlife. You would see turkeys and deer, and all of those have been greatly reduced by the reduction in the number of trees.
Single-use zoning, as I talked about earlier, led to a really high reliance on automobiles because suburban neighborhoods they're just not walkable for the most part. So of course the burning of fossil fuels that come with that reliance on automobiles, it impacts the atmosphere, wildlife, human health. It causes asthma and respiratory diseases like lung cancer. It's really dangerous. And also a lack of regular exercise in comparison to a walkable city where you're walking to the store or your work, depending on where you are. It can lead to more health risks like obesity, and also zoning can lead to the division of people based on economic and financial status.
I think the people who border on the suburban development are affected by it because they have to experience the increased traffic flow, the increased light pollution, the increased noise pollution, but they don't get any of the benefits. For instance, where my house is located, we'll be able to see homes that cost $1 million and have all of the latest, high-speed internets. Whereas at my house, we can't even get AT&T. There's nothing available for us except for the cellular company's internet or perhaps Starlink. So that won't come to us, no matter how close we are to those fantastic amenities that the other people have. It won't. We won't have it.
Wildlife destruction is one of the most direct impacts of suburban sprawl, as woods and green areas have to be destroyed as one of the first steps of actually constructing a suburban neighborhood or even like a commercial area. It's just like you have to destroy trees and stuff. And also, Over the Hedge, that's like such a great movie and was sort of like a crazy commentary on this. Was it about a raccoon who looks kind of like Neil Patrick Harris trying not to get eaten by a bear? Yes.
But at the same time, it was like about this little group of animals who had no idea they were like surrounded by suburban neighborhoods and were gonna get destroyed. So that was kind of crazy.
But while not all greenery might be removed, there's like some protections being put in place. It's usually the land that's left is not enough to actually sustain native life that are trying to survive.
They have definitely cleared out historically wooded lands and rural lands to put in very large homes with very small yards, and they put in non-native, mostly just landscaping trees.
I actually found this point about native species being replaced, like specifically native plants, really interesting, and I wanted to look into that some more. So I live in a suburban neighborhood. I'm not going to sit here complaining about suburban neighborhoods, but like act like I don't literally live in one. But just because I live in one doesn't mean I have to love the system behind it. That kind of mindset is leads to like extreme nationalism, like 1800s manifest destiny type stuff. But anyways, I decided to go out and record what kind of plants I could find intentionally planted by the town in my area. So I just went out to the end of my neighborhood and the street that's kind of like surrounding that area and just use this app to record what plants are there, and it kind of tells you a little bit of information about each plant. So immediately after making my little spreadsheet after, recording all these plants, I was surprised to find that only 2 out of the 12 plant species I recorded were native. It was only the red mangrove and the wax myrtle. I was intrigued to find out that most of them were native to East Asia, the ones that are not native to North Carolina. I also found out that 11 out of 12 of the plants that I recorded were categorized as easy to take care of. The one that wasn't was like categorized just medium level. So it's pretty plausible that when considering what plants to plant, they take into consideration if it's easy to take care of or not. But luckily, out of the plants, majority of the plants that were not native to North Carolina, they weren't invasive. They were either exotic or cultivated. But that being said, some of the species like the Japanese zelkova are invasive to nearby states, and the sawtooth oak is invasive to all of North Carolina's neighboring states, except for Tennessee. Most people aren't aware of this, and so this runs the risk of people spreading seeds of these plants that aren't invasive to North Carolina, but they can spread them into other states, and that puts other state plant life at risk. Suburbanization also has a big impact on a community. Big business chains like to move into suburban areas to attract potential customers of residents that are forced to go to their nearby strip mall to buy groceries or something like that. And so having these centralized areas of stores forces small businesses to buy their stores right next to these big chains like Target and Walmart and Harris Teeter. And that's just often, they just can't compete. It's just not plausible. So then what are some solutions to the harmful effects of suburbanization? Smart growth or new urbanism is a movement to improve land zoning plans and expansion policies to benefit the health of the community. Some of its main goals are the preservation of woods and green areas, producing and helping current already built towns to be walkable and bikeable, using a variety of land usage rather than just single-use zoning, and an emphasis on community-level decision-making. Of course, not everyone within a movement is going to have the same opinion. There's going to be a lot of differing opinions about stuff like how much government intervention there should be. So it's not as simple. It's a little bit more complicated than you might think to carry out these goals.
I think that we need to start implementing rules like if you have this amount of land that you've purchased for a neighborhood, you need to preserve this percentage of trees. And that doesn't mean like leaving a tiny 3-foot strip of really tall pine trees. It means like leaving some of the large established oaks. And then we also need to put in rules that require them to plant native trees and plants when they're doing the landscaping on these new homes, not bringing in invasive species and planting those.
Urban growth boundaries is the process of creating distinct boundaries for development which are set for 20 years without further expansion. They separate areas for the growth of urban life, areas for agriculture, and areas for open space. Rather than a constant expansion of cities, this encourages a focused growth in the quality of already existing cities and neighborhoods. A successful example of this system was Portland, Oregon in the late 1970s. While they were developing in the same boundary without expanding further, the population increased by 50%, but the city succeeded in developing a successful public transit system and bike trails over time, instead of just being completely reliant on automobiles. And I find it really interesting that there's actually been a decent amount of other actions taken to combat the harm that comes from suburbanization. For one, the Congress for the New Urbanism, or the CNU, is an organization created to tackle issues caused by urban sprawl in order to improve quality of life and formulate better plans in urban planning systems. But doing all this research made me wonder how other people my age feel about this. Am I the only one that has these concerns? Because a lot of people at my school also live in a suburban neighborhood or in a cookie cutter neighborhood, and the area around it has been going through a lot of quick development, much of that being neighborhoods.
I'd rather live in a walkable place because having everything closer to you, it just seems better. I mean, less pollution, 1, and 2, I can't really drive, but yeah.
I think I'd rather live in a walkable or bikeable city because it's really nice to be able to walk to Lowe's and talk to my friends, and it's nice whenever cafes or pet stores open in a walking distance. It's just funner to walk than drive. They happen really slowly. The bridge over there, the road over there was supposed to be completed 5 years ago, and it was really recently completed.
I found it really interesting to hear one perspective saying that development had been slow, which I honestly didn't really think of at first, but it can happen sometimes in already built areas that improvement and further development within the already built area is not really focused on, or it can be neglected.
There's been a lot of new trees and some new flowers that I've seen, and they grow a lot, and people don't really trim them or cut them, so I've hit my head quite a few times.
The areas that are already there, that are around you. I've seen cases of new neighborhoods being built, and the way their water runoff has been approved is that their water is actually running off into an established home's yard, and it causes flooding in their place. But this is all approved. It passed inspection.
And this is something that smart growth seeks to combat, as I mentioned earlier. In the end, I live a good life. I'm very grateful for my situation, but it's still important to be aware of what's going on where you live, and knowing how suburban development impacts us in the world around us is important, and this research made me realize that there are better ways to live than suburbia. It doesn't mean you have to scrap the whole thing and redo it, but there's ways that it can be improved, and that's something it's worth looking into and researching and just being aware of. Thank you for watching.